What if I told you that these pennies could one day become worthless? Well, such an event is certainly possible, and the idea has been thrown around for quite a few years. And it resurfaced recently back in February when President Obama made a statement against the penny, stating that it is a, quote, good metaphor for the issues regarding our deficit spending. So, in light of this matter, I would like to offer to you today an argument for why we should indeed eliminate the penny. Well, this whole idea, that is, from a piece of legislation called the Price Rounding Act, which was promoted by two Arizona congressmen, James Hayes and Jim Coley. It basically said that we should phase out the penny by requiring that all cash purchases be rounded to the nearest nickel. A challenger soon arose in the form of the lobby group Americans for Common Sense, who is funded by one of the nation's largest zinc producers. And according to the U.S. Mint, almost 98% of a penny is comprised of zinc. Needless to say, the two failed. 10 years later, in 2001, and yet again in 2006, Coley made solo attempts at abolishing the penny, but he was met with failure. So why would anyone consider such a thing? What would be the benefits or the drawbacks of such a decision? Well, first I'll begin by explaining the reasons for why we should abolish the penny. So firstly, due to inflation, pennies have lost their buying power. A quote from the New Yorker explains this quite well. In 1940, an average 1-pound loaf of bread sold for 8 cents according to the U.S. Census Bureau. These days, a penny doesn't buy much more than a bit of crust. And they also state that a penny from 1940 had more purchasing power than a quarter does today. And if you go down to your local Quick Trip, you'll find that the cheapest possible items are these candies for 5 cents. 60 years ago, you would have been able to buy at least 5 of these with just 1 penny. Secondly, pennies cost more to make than they're actually worth. In a 2011 report by the U.S. Mint, they cite that one penny, costs 2.4 cents to produce, which incurs a $60 million loss upon the taxpayers. And also consider the time of the labor, the cost involved in transporting these billions of pennies that are produced every year. And thirdly, pennies are, quite frankly, a waste of time. The Politic, the blog from Yale undergraduate program, they cite a statistic that says that the average American wastes almost 2.5 hours every year handling pennies. And not only that, the New Yorker also gives us another statistic that says if it takes longer to bend down, pick up a penny, if it takes longer than 6 seconds to do that, then that doesn't even match what the federal minimum wage would pay per second in that ratio. And this is fairly reasonable due to the plethora of pennies we see sprawled out on our floors, our sidewalks, our streets, and our roads. So consider that. A large amount of people tread upon those pennies as if they are no more valuable than the dirt that covered them. So getting rid of the penny would not only result in lighter coin purses, but also would also provide a more efficient monetary system. But as mentioned earlier, challengers have arisen in support of the humble penny. And their arguments have thus far prevented its elimination from our monetary system. And so their arguments are as follows. Number one, pro-penny advocates claim that if we get rid of pennies, then consumer prices would increase because we would have to round to the nearest nickel. And they often cite a report by Penn State economics professor Raymond E. Lombra, who says that we'll face a great taxation upon the economy. Due to what he calls the, quote, rounding tax, he says that U.S. taxpayers could face over a $2.5 billion a year cost because of this phenomenon. However, this report is not only overblown, it's quite unrealistic. It ignores the fact that a growing percentage of Americans are now using credit and debit in their transactions, not cash. And unlike cash, debit and credit charges will still be rounded to the nearest cent. And even if you do use cash, the pennies lost by the consumer for rounding up will most likely be offset by the pennies saved for merchants rounding down. Secondly, pro-penny advocates claim that if we get rid of them, that is the pennies, then the U.S. Mint would have to compensate for that loss by producing more of the current coinage. They basically say that because of almost 2/3 of all the pennies produced last year by the U.S. Mint were pennies. So that argument does have some weight. And in addition, the U.S. Mint also states that it costs 11 cents just to produce 1 nickel, which incurs more of a loss than just the penny. So in this respect, it seems like getting rid of these are more trouble than it's worth, but there are solutions. If the U.S. Mint begins to use lower cost methods of production and cheaper alloys, this issue could become non-existent. A Republican Congressman, Frank Lucas from Oklahoma, states that he is in favor of this sentiment. He says that we should, quote, consider readopting the traditional 5-cent coin, the old half dime. So, this may not necessarily happen anytime soon, but it is a worthwhile response to pro-penny concerns. And lastly, the most lauded and really the most common argument against getting rid of these is just that Americans love them far too much to get rid of them. Since the late 90s, recurring polls by Coinstar have shown that a majority of Americans are still in favor of keeping the penny around. And that may very well be true, but the argument could be made that only a minority of Americans actually have an intrinsic love for pennies. How many of you have something like this at home? More than likely, you keep it because of the benefits it gives you economically. See, pennies are greatly abundant in number and easily stored so that they can be traded for something more valuable, like cash. And so, taking that opportunity away from people has been deemed very unpopular for the average American. And it's this very cultural sentiment that has kept pennies in circulation for so long. And so, getting rid of the penny seems like a strange idea, maybe radical, controversial for some, but it's actually quite common. According to CNN, last year, Canada ceased production of its penny without significant ramifications upon our economy. And in addition, New Zealand, Australia, and even the UK have gotten rid of their pennies as well. If foreign nations are able to achieve such a task, the United States is certainly more than able. So, today I gave you an argument for why we should eliminate the penny, reasons why we should keep it, and pretty much everything in between. So, penny for your thoughts? Thank you.